They fired me while I was finalizing a $1.1 billion deal. Not after. Not when the contracts were dry. While I was still in the damn room, representing them. It was supposed to be a routine call. 7 a.m. sharp. I was in our midtown office, floor-to-ceiling glass, espresso going cold on the windowsill. Across the screen, the Japanese CEO, the French legal advisor, and the Brazilian CFO, all seated, all ready. I had spent 8 months getting them to that table. And just as we were walking through the final clauses of a 3-nation infrastructure rollout, my screen froze. Then, Slack logged me out. Then email. Then Zoom. Gone. I stared at my reflection in the black screen. My reflection stared back, blank, unblinking, stunned. 30 seconds later, a text lit up on my personal phone. Vanessa, your position has been dissolved, effective immediately. Please return all company property by 5 p.m. No signature. Just that. I didn't say anything. Didn't scream. Didn't call back. I just looked around the room, my deal folders, the whiteboard I had mapped timelines on, the custom framework I built from scratch. All of it, now irrelevant. And then I smiled. Because what they didn't know, what they hadn't seen coming, was this: 6 months earlier, long before the backroom politics, before the missed promotions, before my access started glitching, I had already begun building something of my own. Quietly. Legally. Impeccably clean. Not out of spite. Out of necessity. And that wasn't even the worst part. Because the client? The $1.1 billion client they thought they'd just inherited? He still had my number. And he was already calling. Stick around, because next I'll tell you what I said on that call, and how one sentence changed the entire course of this deal. I let it ring once. Twice. On the third, I answered, calm, steady, as if I hadn't just been erased minutes earlier. Vanessa-san, came the voice from Tokyo. Formal, clipped, but not cold. Is this a bad time? No, I said. It's exactly the right time. He didn't ask why the call had cut off. Didn't ask why the Technova address bounced his follow-up email. He knew. They always know. Instead, he asked, are you still leading this project? I paused, just long enough to let the silence carry weight. Not under Technova, I said. But the architecture, the roadmap, the alignment across your subsidiaries, that was me. It still is. A breath. Then, would you be willing to continue, independently? That was the moment. Not when I got fired. Not when they stripped my credentials. This was the real shift, when a billion-dollar client chose me over the logo. I leaned back, eyes on the skyline. Let's set a private call. I'll walk you through the options. Because I had options. Kepler One wasn't a dream. It wasn't some spite-fueled side project. It was incorporated, funded, NDA signed, contract ready. And built quietly with 3 other ex-Technova talents they'd quietly forced out over the past year: legal, GIOPS, architecture. Each one trusted. Each one sharp. I hadn't built Kepler One to compete. I built it because I knew the storm was coming. And because the only thing more powerful than loyalty is preparation. But this call? This wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was about realigning power, under my name. And next. I'd have to face the woman they hired to replace me. Because Shannon hadn't just taken my seat. She was already pitching my slides. Let me take you back to how she got there, and why she never saw the wire I left behind. Shannon Cross. 32. Just promoted to Director of Strategic Initiatives 3 weeks before they let me go. On paper? Ivy League. Fast-track promotion. Handpicked by the COO after a stellar pitch at last quarter's town hall. But the truth? She'd never closed a deal over $20 million. Never led a multi-region integration. Never built trust across 3 languages, 4 currencies, and a dozen legal frameworks. What she had was optics. Pretty ones. The first time I saw her, she was touring the executive floor with a latte and a laminated pitch deck I'd written. Word for word. Even the bullet spacing was mine. They didn't even bother to change the format. She must have thought I wouldn't notice. That I wouldn't see my own phrases in her mouth, or my roadmap printed in her vision statement. But I did. I saw it all. And I said nothing. Because when your enemies think you're gone, they stop hiding their footprints. And I needed hers. 3 days before the firing, I was still attending internal reviews. Still getting CC'd on investor prep calls. Shannon had just joined one of our Asia-Pacific shadow meetings, supposed to be observing. But I watched her take over the Zoom floor and present my client dashboard like it was her own. Her voice shaky, pausing after each slide. Then came the question. How does this proposed compliance clause differ from the original EU protocol version? She froze. My eyes met the legal leads in the call. He didn't blink. Just leaned forward and said, Vanessa? I answered. Clean. Surgical. No emotion. Shannon smiled like nothing had happened. Later that evening, my internal dashboard access was restricted. By morning, my name had been scrubbed from the project overview entirely. And by end of day, I was gone. Except, not really. Because before they cut me out, I'd already flagged the dashboard logs, archived version control, and sent a timestamped file to a private server. Including the one clause Shannon never understood. The one that gave the client full rights to terminate the deal, if Technova changed key leadership without disclosure. And guess what? They never told him I was removed. But I would. Because the $1.1 billion wasn't just on the table. It was on the edge. And I was about to tilt it. What came next wasn't just strategic. It was surgical. And someone was about to bleed. The email I sent was short. Just a single line to the Japanese CEO's personal assistant, encrypted, discreet, no Technova headers in sight. Please review Clause 14.2 of Appendix D, and confirm whether leadership disclosures were filed post-February. 10 minutes later, he replied. They were not. That was all I needed. Clause 14.2 wasn't just legal boilerplate. I'd insisted on adding it myself during the 3rd round of negotiations, under the guise of regional alignment assurance. It required full transparency of any senior leadership changes affecting cross-border operations. It was dry, buried, and absolutely binding. And they'd missed it. Shannon had no idea. Neither did legal. Because they never read the footnotes I wrote. They skimmed. They assumed. But I didn't write clauses for them. I wrote them for days like this. I forwarded the clause, the time-stamped version history, and the internal handoff records to Kepler One's general counsel. You're sure this voids Technova's standing? She asked over Signal. Yes, I said. And the client's already on edge. She didn't ask what I was planning. She didn't need to. That night, I got a calendar invite from the French and Brazilian delegates, joint review, 1 p.m. Eastern Time, private session. Technova wasn't on it. Shannon wasn't invited. I logged in 5 minutes early. My screen showed 3 video boxes. 3 calm, familiar faces. No suits. No pretense. Just decision makers. The French advisor spoke first. We're aware of the clause. The Brazilian CFO nodded. And we're prepared to exercise it. Then, silence. They were waiting for me. To propose an alternative to fill the vacuum. To replace the brand they no longer trusted, with something else. I didn't pitch. I didn't oversell. I simply said, I've launched a firm. Independent. Clean. Fully staffed. All compliance and architecture from the original framework is intact. It's called Kepler 1. I shared the dossier. NDA. Corporate structure. Legal opinion. Advisory board. They read in silence. And then, almost in sync, they nodded. We'll need to exit Technova within 72 hours, one said. Can your team absorb the transition? I didn't blink. We've already mapped the infrastructure. The switch can begin tomorrow. And that's when it became real. The $1.1 billion wasn't just back in play. It was mine to catch. But before I could celebrate, my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in months. Michael Stanton. Technova's general counsel. The man who once said, "You're the only strategist I'd go to war with." Now he was calling. And I already knew, he wasn't calling to apologize. He was calling to threaten. Michael Stanton didn't waste time. Vanessa, he said, voice tight. We've been informed that you've engaged with our clients post-termination. That's a breach of your non-solicitation clause. I almost laughed. Instead, I leaned back in my chair and said, you may want to reread that clause, Michael. It only applies to active clients. There was a pause. Then a quieter, more careful tone, the contracts haven't been formally severed yet. Exactly, I said. But clause 14.2 makes that moot. Your side failed to disclose a material leadership change. You voided your standing the second Shannon took point without legal notification. Another pause. Longer this time. I could hear him clicking, probably scrolling through the internal copy of the original appendix I wrote, the one he never annotated. I'm sure we can resolve this quietly, he said finally, slipping into his default legal damage control voice. If your firm retracts its proposal, we'll consider a neutral mediation, perhaps even a consulting role for you. He was bargaining now. And it only made me more certain I had them cornered. I didn't take the bait. Kepler 1 doesn't retract offers, I said. And I don't consult for companies that erase people. I hung up. 1 minute later, my inbox pinged. It was Shannon. Subject line, we need to talk. She'd attached a calendar invite titled Clarification Discussion, Kepler versus Technova, Urgent. The audacity. She wanted to talk now? After reciting my slides in a pitch meeting she didn't even understand? I opened the invite, stared at it, and deleted it without replying. Some conversations don't need to happen. Some power shifts are silent. Because Shannon didn't realize something crucial, this deal was never about the logo. It was about trust. And I'd already won that, long before I lost my title. But I wasn't finished yet. There was still one thing I needed to do. Call a meeting with the client's board. And not just to secure the transition, but to reveal what Technova had been hiding all along. The board call was scheduled for Friday, 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 7 delegates. 3 continents. 1 agenda, transition. I wore black. Not because I was mourning what they took from me, but because power wears silence better than color. When the call opened, I greeted them with calm certainty, the kind that doesn't ask for permission. The French delegate spoke first. Ms. Quinn, we received your transition roadmap. It's thorough. It had to be, I replied. This isn't just a change of vendor. It's a reclamation of control. Then I shared the slides. Not just the logistics of the switchover, but something deeper, a comparison. Kepler 1's infrastructure versus Technova's. The failure points. The inflated service markups. The misaligned compliance clauses in the post-transition draft Shannon had approved. I had flagged them in red. Then I opened the last slide, Technova's own internal amendment from 4 weeks ago, quietly removing cross-regional failsafes without client notification. How did you get this? One board member asked. I didn't blink. It was submitted to a shared compliance portal I built, while still at Technova. And I let that sit. Because I knew what they were realizing. That the very system they were contracting had been rebuilt behind their backs. We trusted Technova, one of them said finally, his voice tight. You trusted me, I corrected. And you were right too. Silence. Then the chairman leaned forward and asked the question I'd been waiting for. If we authorize the full pivot, can your firm handle the delivery timeline? I didn't hesitate. We already are. The migration mirror went live last night. They looked around, subtle nods passed through the grid of faces. And then, just before they adjourned, the chairman added, you'll be leading the next phase. Not Technova. Not Shannon. Me. I closed the call, heart steady, not racing. This wasn't a victory lap. It was an execution. Clean, quiet, legal. But right as I was shutting my laptop, a new email arrived. Subject, immediate cease and desist, Technova Legal Department. They weren't giving up. But neither was I. Because now, it was time to take them to court. Not for the money. For the record. The cease and desist came dressed in corporate polish, letterhead sharp, legal threats tucked behind polite language. Cease all client engagement involving proprietary systems developed during your tenure at Technova Inc. They were bluffing. I knew at the moment I saw the phrase proprietary systems. Because nothing I'd used belonged to them. Not the framework, not the clauses, not the protocols. I'd built those outside company hours, documented them through Kepler-One's IP channel, and submitted timestamps to the U.S. Copyright Office 3 months before they even noticed. But this wasn't about systems. It was about fear. Technova wasn't worried about losing the deal. They were worried the industry would see how replaceable they truly were. I called my lawyer, Noah Sterling. Calm, brutal, meticulous. He reviewed the letter, scanned the attachments, then looked at me through the screen. They don't have a case, he said. But they're betting you'll fold to avoid noise. I don't fold. He smiled. Then let's file first. And we did. That same afternoon, Kepler-One filed a preemptive declaratory judgment suit, asking the court to affirm that no intellectual property was breached, that all transitions were lawful, and that Technova's attempt to interfere constituted corporate defamation. It was clean, precise, and public. By 5 p.m., our legal notice was circulating in industry inboxes. By 7 p.m., a tech blog picked it up. By midnight, my name was trending on a closed corporate forum under the headline, Technova's $1.1 billion meltdown, from star director to rival CEO. They thought a lawsuit would scare me. What they didn't realize. They'd just handed me a megaphone. But this wasn't about attention. It was about leverage. Because while they were scrambling to clean up headlines, I was already meeting with their second largest client. And what I offered them made Technova irrelevant overnight. Let me tell you what happened in that room. It was a penthouse suite in Chicago, discreet, glass-wrapped, high above the noise. Their second largest client was already seated when I arrived. CFO, CTO, head of global ops. All three looked like they hadn't slept in days. They didn't offer coffee. They didn't waste time. We read the filing, the CFO said. And if half of it's true, we've got a problem. It's all true, I said. And so is this, Technova has been billing you 32% above industry benchmarks for back-end services they no longer own. The CTO leaned forward. You're saying they've been charging us for systems they can't control? I'm saying, I said evenly, you've been underwriting a ghost operation. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out the report, 72 pages, sourced from their own contract logs, flagged by my team during a routine scan of industry footprints. It wasn't just overbilling. It was misalignment, failed benchmarks, system downtime buried under coded language like elastic recalibration. They didn't speak. So I kept going. Kepler One already supports Tier 1 infrastructure across 3 continents. We're agile, secure, and untied to Technova's bloated framework. You want clean migration? I can do it in 45 days. And if we stay with them, the head of ops asked. You risk being tied to a system you don't own, run by people you no longer trust, backed by tech they no longer understand. Silence. Then the CFO whispered, "Can you get us out, cleanly?" I nodded. And in that moment, I watched it happen again. The shift. Not in dollars, not in contracts, those came later. This was about weight. The quiet kind. The kind that moves entire markets without needing to shout. They didn't sign anything that night. But I left with something stronger than ink. I left with intent. And the next morning? Technova's board woke up to 3 withdrawal notices in their inboxes. The $1.1 billion deal wasn't just gone. Their future was hemorrhaging. And just when they thought it couldn't get worse, it did, because someone from inside their own executive team just switched sides. The message came in encrypted. No subject line. No sender name. Just one line of text: "I've seen enough. I want out. I stared at it for a full minute before replying. Meet me off-site. 3 p.m. Roosevelt Hotel. Bring nothing company issued. He showed up 5 minutes early. Same tailored jacket. Same steel watch, arrogance dulled by stress. Martin Ellison, EVP of International Expansion, one of the few at Technova who'd actually built something before the politics sank in. I hadn't spoken to him since my firing. Now he looked like a man carrying a secret too long. "They're drowning," he said quietly as he sat across from me. "Legals in chaos. PR's on blackout. And Shannon," he exhaled. "She's blaming you for everything. She's calling it sabotage." I tilted my head. It's not sabotage if the building collapses from its own rot. Martin didn't smile. "Look. I stayed too long. But I'm done defending amateurs. You were the architect, Vanessa. And they tried to sell your house without the blueprint." He handed me a flash drive. Internal decks. Financial disclosures. Meeting minutes from the last 3 board calls. One of them had Shannon's voice recorded, claiming the deal was secured even after I'd been removed. "That's securities fraud," I said. Martin nodded. "I know. And this?" I tapped the flash drive. "You're sure it's clean?" "It's clean," he said. "And I'm in." "In for what?" "For Kepler. I don't care about titles. I just want to work somewhere where competence isn't a threat." I believed him. Not because he apologized, he didn't. But because traitors and allies don't always wear different faces. Sometimes they're just men who finally stop lying to themselves. That night, Kepler One's legal team opened a new file, Exhibit B, Internal Misrepresentation of Client Contract Status. And the next morning, we received a formal request. The SEC wanted to talk. About Technova. About the $1.1 billion deal. And about the unnamed executive who buried a disclosure. They hadn't named Shannon yet. But they would. Because I wasn't the one under investigation anymore. She was. The SEC call lasted 23 minutes. They didn't ask about feelings. They asked about facts, version control logs, email chains, access privileges, timestamps. I had everything. And every document pointed to one thing: Shannon had falsely represented the deal as active and uncontested in a quarterly report filed to investors. While I was already gone. While the client had already begun pivoting to Kepler. Which meant someone at Technova had certified a billion-dollar asset as stable, knowing it was slipping through their fingers. That wasn't negligence. It was fraud. 3 days later, Technova's stock took a hit. Small at first. A dip. But rumors travel faster than press releases. And when an anonymous source leaked the phrase unreported leadership removal mid-contract, the market responded accordingly. Their phones stopped ringing. Ours started lighting up. Vendors. Partners. Even former competitors. All asking the same thing, is it true? Are you really behind the pivot? We didn't answer publicly. We didn't need to. Instead, we spent that weekend onboarding 3 new clients, quietly, cleanly, legally. Kepler One had gone from rogue player to rising force in under 30 days. And Technova? They began sending settlement feelers through their attorneys. First came the flattery. You're a brilliant operator, Vanessa. Surely there's a way to find middle ground. Then the fear. If this escalates, it could damage everyone. Then the threat. You won't be able to walk away untouched. They didn't understand. I hadn't been trying to walk away untouched. I wanted the fingerprints visible. I wanted them traced. Because Shannon was still holding out hope that this could be spun, salvaged, controlled. She hadn't seen the last card yet. The one Martin handed me that night, recorded minutes from a closed-door strategy session, where she said, the client doesn't care about Vanessa. They care about outcomes. Just keep feeding them numbers and they won't notice. That line wasn't just arrogant. It was admissible. I forwarded the audio to our legal team. And then I drafted a single sentence to send back to Technova's attorneys. No settlement. We're filing for breach, misrepresentation, and IP defamation. Because if they wanted this quiet, they were decades too late. And the next time Shannon walked into a boardroom? She wouldn't be pitching. She'd be explaining. The court documents were filed Monday at 8:03 a.m. By 8:11, they were trending. Industry blogs picked it up first. Strategist turned CEO files against former employer over $1.1 billion contract meltdown. By noon, tech media had headlines like the woman who outsmarted her boss and took the deal with her. And Shannon? She went silent. No interviews. No LinkedIn posts. No replies to board pings. Just vanished behind her executive title like it could shield her from collapse. But the damage was already bleeding through. Investors started pulling back. Partners paused renewals. The narrative shifted from internal misstep to systemic failure. Meanwhile, Kepler One was scaling. We expanded our server capacity. Onboard 6 former Technova engineers who left without fanfare, but with NDAs in hand and quiet resolve in their eyes. They didn't ask for titles either. They just said, let's build it right this time. And we did. One of our clients, the same one that anchored the original deal, sent a single sentence in their renewal notice. This time, let's not forget who made it happen. I stared at that line longer than I should have. Because behind every billion-dollar pivot, there's something quieter. The missed funerals. The cancelled birthdays. The weekends spent rewriting strategy decks at 2 a.m. Shannon never understood that. To her, this was always about the title, the optics, the rise. To me? It was about building something no one could erase. And as I stood in the corner office of Kepler's new downtown space, no plaque, no portraits, I felt something I hadn't in months, stillness. Control. Closure? Almost. But not yet. Because the final hearing was scheduled for Friday. And Shannon had been subpoenaed. She wasn't going to be shielded by PR anymore. She'd have to speak. Under oath. And what she said would decide how this story ends. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not the air, just the mood. Shannon sat 2 tables away, surrounded by attorneys, posture perfect, face composed. But her eyes, they flickered. She hadn't expected it to go this far. Hadn't expected me to hold the line. The judge called us to order. Statements were read. Evidence submitted. Then came the moment. "Miss Cross," the attorney said, "on March 14th, did you report to Technova's board that the client engagement was secure and active?" Shannon cleared her throat. "Yes. Based on the information I had." "And were you aware that Vanessa Quinn had already been removed from her position at that time?" A pause. I was informed, yes." "Did you disclose that change to the client per clause 14.2? Silence. "No, why not?" She blinked. "I didn't think they'd care." Gasps weren't allowed in court, but I saw it, in the shifting posture of the gallery, in the way Technova's general counsel buried his face in his hands. That was it. Not a technicality. Not a misstep. A choice. A deliberate gamble to erase my presence and pretend no one would notice. The judge leaned forward. "Thank you, Miss Cross. That will be all." And just like that, the narrative shifted, legally, permanently. 2 days later, the ruling came in. Technova was found liable for breach of contract, misrepresentation, and intellectual property defamation. They were ordered to pay full damages, legal fees, and retract their public statements. Shannon resigned that afternoon. No farewell email. No press release. Just silence. The kind of silence that follows collapse. I didn't celebrate. I didn't post a victory speech. I simply returned to the office, sat at my desk, and opened a file labeled Phase 2, New Markets, New Territories, New Deals. Because this wasn't the end. It was the start. Quiet power doesn't chase applause. It builds foundations deep enough to survive storms. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't loud. It's becoming untouchable. And now, they could try. But they'd never catch me again.